But I woke up the next morning, there must be a logical explanation. I called around. I finally found air traffic controllers at Sky Harbor International Airport who saw the same thing at the same time. They were very forthcoming initially and admitted that they saw the lights at 3 o'clock, at 8 o'clock too. It was 3 and 8 o'clock, and were very excited that I saw them. They looked on radar, did not show up on radar, and it was over Class B restricted airspace. That's really important. There's a 30-mile radius around the center of the airport. Anyone that comes into that airspace must call the tower,
right,
especially at 1,000 feet altitude that these were. No one did, so they got alarmed. And when these 6 popped up at 8:30, they really got alarmed because did not show up on radar. They took their high-powered binoculars to look at, in their own words, they saw 6 points of light totally equidistant from each other, massive span, over a mile long, that seemed to be attached to something, but they couldn't quite see what these lights were attached to or had a force field for them in rock-solid equidistant array. And one of them was a meteorologist and said the entire thing turned as a unit against the wind.
Wow.
That's really significant too.
Yeah.
Elevated slowly and moved in synchrony behind South Mountain. So I said, so what was it?
Right.
And there was silence. And then one of them says, beats me. I said, you're air traffic controllers.
Yeah.
You're supposed to know what's in airspace. They ruled out every conventional aircraft, balloons, Chinese lanterns, blimps, even skydivers with lights and flares. They ruled out everything.
Greetings and welcome to the Vortex. I'm your host, Daniel Allen Jones, and I'm very honored to be here with Dr. Lynne Kitei. Lynne, great to have you here. And it's good to be here in Phoenix, where the Phoenix Lights took place many years ago, over 20 years ago now. And the incredible thing is that you were not only able to produce several different books and a documentary on it, but you were an eyewitness to this incredible incident as well. So take us back and tell us what it was like to actually be there and witness something that has been one of the most monumental cases in UFO research.
Actually, March 13th, 1997, while thousands of people were looking skyward for a glimpse of the Hale-Bopp comet, it was just another night for me.
Yeah.
But they also caught a glimpse, as I did, of a mile, and we just learned recently from the head of the National UFO Reporting Center in Seattle, Washington, Peter Davenport,
Yeah.
one of the objects was actually 8 miles wide.
Wow.
I mean, it's amazing how after 22 years, the story keeps evolving, new information comes out,
Yeah.
new witnesses come forward, as you know, just this past year, Kurt Russell,
Yeah.
who was flying into Sky Harbor Airport on approach and saw the same exact thing, V-shape of 6 lights that I was seeing and photographing at the same time, which is pretty neat.
That's right. So you actually got some photographs of this. You didn't just see it, but then you captured what we have now as evidence that you've talked about in your books here, you tell about in your documentary. I think it's something that a lot of people can be dismissive of if they say, well, where's the proof? You know, you saw something, but then what? Did you get a video? Did you get a picture? And a lot of people say, well, it was too grainy, it didn't come out good. But you have some actually very good photographs, and I think it's something that really stands out because there's a controversy when it comes to the Phoenix Lights. And of course, you know probably better than anyone, a lot of people think that, those were just flares, or they were military personnel in parachutes coming down, and there was a whole show, and it was a some kind of procedure, and there's so many things that people try to say write it off. What has your response been like when it comes to trying to have people debunk the whole issue as to what this object was, or these objects maybe?
Everyone comes from a different background, different upbringing, different worldview. Some people can't deal with this topic, some people don't want to. That's okay. Everyone in their own time. But now there is data. They want to feed into the flare theory. If that gives them comfort, so be it. But now there's data. And actually, I'm the only one with 35mm photographs. Before, during, and after what has become the most historic, most witnessed, and most documented mass sighting in modern history. And I have always go back to the first sighting in 1995 when my husband and I are physicians, and had no interest or knowledge in the topic at all. And
Right.
one wall of our window in our bedroom, we were pretty high on the mountain in Paradise Valley and overlook the valley and the city skyline. So we see the airport from our view, so we know what helicopters and streetlights and firelights and so forth look like. These were very different. There were 3 orbs in the pyramid formation a little below us, one on top and 2 closely aligned underneath. And they just hovered there for minutes. And I tried to take everything in. I didn't want to move, but you will hear from many people who have an extraordinary experience. You're in awe,
Yeah.
wonder. And they were about 3 to 6 feet each, depending on how close they were. They were oval shaped, which is interesting because now that the Navy pilots are coming forward and talking about this tic-tac
Sure, yeah.
craft, I don't know, but they were oval shaped.
Yeah, that's
okay?
interesting.
And they had a uniform amber color throughout. It didn't glare at all. Every other light out there glared. And I thought, if I don't get a picture of this, no one's going to believe it. And I go running to the closet to grab my 35mm that I keep handy for the beautiful sunsets we have in Arizona. My husband calls me back and says, get over here quick, one of them is disappearing.
Oh, wow.
And as we watch, and I have to also describe that the light within each orb did not extend outside the edge. It was self-contained, very important data. But the top orb, without budget, started to shrink very, very slowly. It's difficult to even describe. It's almost like a dimmer switch, but getting smaller and more mechanical, as if there's an intelligence behind it.
Right.
And gets smaller and smaller, slowly, till it was a pea size, and then it disappeared. But it felt like it was still there, ready to go.
Yeah, that's
And
really
the
interesting.
only thing I can liken it to is to another dimension,
Yeah.
perhaps. Cloaking. It was cloaking.
Yeah,
That
maybe
was the
so.
feeling. Anyway, I get out on the balcony. I get a quick picture of the 2 lower orbs. And anyone that's interested in seeing the photo data, which is on display at the Phoenix Lights Network website at the photo page. Again, the only 35mm, and also analyzed and authenticated by military and government and university optical experts for the last 22 years.
Yeah.
No one can give me an answer to what they are,
That's
only what
incredible.
they aren't. And at any rate, while I'm out on the balcony, there was an eerie silence as if time had stopped. It was just bizarre. And I didn't share this with a soul until 2 years after the last sighting, 2 years later.
Oh, yeah.
But as I was staring at these 2 bottom orbs, it felt like something was staring back. And going through my mind, I thought, who are you? What are you? Do you know that I'm here? I'd love to meet you. And the next thing I remember, the left bottom orb started to implode like the top one did. And I quickly shot a picture of that. That was the only one that turned out at the time. But for me, it was spectacular because, number one, it showed one half disappeared and one's still there. It's amazing. It's 35mm to capture that. It's in the negative. And it was close. I mean, you could see that you saw something that was extraordinary, but I didn't even know who to show it to.
Yeah.
And I wondered for 2 years what this advanced technology was doing right outside our bedroom window. 2 years later, without seeing anything remotely close to these orbs, I noticed 3 giant orbs at a distance far west in a line formation. And I noted they were amber, their inner formation, they hovered for minutes, strangely similar to 95. And mentioned it to my husband. Interestingly, he didn't want to talk about it.
Oh, wow.
I was in awe and wonder. He just didn't want to talk about it. Okay. Just mentioned it to him. The next night, he was in a medical board meeting. He was on several medical and hospital boards. And I noticed the same 3 lights are now in front of South Mountain. And I knew they were in front of South Mountain because the airport is just in front of South Mountain, and there's red blinking lights on the mountain to alert airplanes coming into Sky Harbor that there's a mountain there.
Right. So there is some air traffic there
Oh,
already.
yeah, constantly.
But this was different,
Very
noticeably.
Very different. Plus, it was in front of South Mountain, lower than these lights. So I thought, okay, enough. I'm getting my video camera, bring it outside. Got about 18 seconds worth of battery, there's dead.
Oh, of course.
And it was charged.
Oh,
Go
wow.
back inside. So I go hook up the battery and go outside, they're gone. It was about 8 o'clock. About 8:30, my husband comes up the drive And I go outside. I said, honey, remember I told you about the 3 giant orbs last night in a line equidistant from each other about a half an hour ago. They were right in front of South Mountain. As I'm pointing like this, they reappeared at the same spot.
Wow.
I was like, whoa, I got to get a picture of this. So I don't believe in coincidence anymore, because on video, they do not do the lights justice.
Right.
In video, they're much smaller, they're white, they flicker. Even though, if you really look, the formations are very compelling, but could be mistaken for other lights. But on 35 millimeter, they're in the negative. And I go step out on the balcony. As I'm ready to shoot the 3, suddenly 6 across appear. Massive span, over a mile wide.
Wow.
I started to shake. If you look at the first picture of the Phoenix Lights Network photo page, it's wavy because I was shaking. Because not having an explanation for 95, what is this?
Sure.
Massive. Is it a mothership or a fleet or whatever? But I kept clicking away, thank goodness, because the second picture is really important. Because it shows 5 lights in a V formation. It looks like 2 are underneath. Well, 2 months later, during the mass sighting, thousands of people would describe 5 lights in a V formation with 2 trailing. This was 2 months before,
wow.
right? And as I'm clicking away, the entire thing turns into a V. Well, did not sleep well that night. Figured there's got to be an explanation. I'm a healthy skeptic. God, it must be open when you're a physician. But I woke up the next morning, there must be a logical explanation. I called around. I finally found air traffic controllers at Sky Harbor International Airport who saw the same thing at the same time. They were very forthcoming initially and admitted that they saw the lights at 3 o'clock, at 8 o'clock too. It was 3 at 8 o'clock, and were very excited that I saw them. They looked on radar, did not show up on radar, and it was over Class B restricted airspace. That's really important. There's a 30-mile radius around the center of the airport. Anyone that comes into that airspace must call the tower,
Right.
especially at 1,000 feet altitude that these were. No one did, so they got alarmed. And when these 6 popped up at 8:30, they really got alarmed because did not show up on radar. They took their high-powered binoculars to look at it in their own words. They saw 6 points of light totally equidistant from each other, massive span, over a mile wide, that seemed to be attached to something. But they couldn't quite see what these lights were attached to or had a force field carrying them in rock-solid equidistant array. And one of them was a meteorologist and said the entire thing turned as a unit against the wind.
Wow.
That's really significant too.
Yeah.
Elevated slowly and moved in synchrony behind South Mountain. So I said, so what was it?
Right.
And there was silence. And then one of them said, beats me. I said, you're air traffic controllers.
Yeah.
You're supposed to know what's in airspace. They ruled out every conventional aircraft, balloons, Chinese lanterns, blimps, even skydivers with lights and flares. They ruled out everything.
That makes me wonder, a lot of people, like we said, they like to try to make sense out of those being skydivers or flares. But even if that was the case, even if it was a military drill, wouldn't someone have let those air traffic controllers know that,
They
by
would
the
not
way, we're
be
going to
there.
be here performing this at this time, but nothing was said? That would make us wonder, okay, if there is any water that could be held with the idea that they're flares or they're parachuters or they're skydivers, military or otherwise, someone would probably know about that and have told air traffic control or anyone nearby. So that's strange to think that they wouldn't have still done that. So.
Absolutely. I mean, that's unequivocal. They are not allowed. Nothing is allowed in Class B restricted airspace without calling the tower, and no one did. Now, what's also significant is 2 months later, during the mass sighting, there is so much disinformation out there. One of the main reasons I came forward after 7 years of anonymity after the mass sighting, searching for a logical explanation, which I have yet to find 22 years later, and a 750-page journal later. But what's really significant is the mass sighting day, March 13th, actually started with sightings at 3 p.m., anomalous aerial sightings. 3 p.m., 5 o'clock hour, they were seen in New Mexico by Native Americans. 7 o'clock hour in California. 11 o'clock hour, actually one of these mile-wide craft, and there were a number of them, I'll get to that in a second, was seen covering Las Vegas by 2 commercial airline pilots. And the sightings continued all the way until the next morning at 5:30 is the last report that I took personally from a Boeing crewman from Sky Harbor as his whole crew was coming into Luke Air Force Base. One of these mile-wide craft covered their tarmac. So it wasn't just 1 or 2 hours as you would hear in the media. Yes, the bulk of calls came into the news and so forth between 8 and 10 because most people were outside looking up at the sky at the half-hour comet at that time.
Yeah.
But the mass sighting was much more far-reaching, not only over a dozen hours, but also in Nevada and New Mexico and California as well as Arizona.
Wow.
Now, the technology itself is mind-boggling.
Sure.
Because we're talking mile to 8 mile wide, either these lights and rock-solid formation that seem to be attached to something or actual craft. And after a 12-year study, and if you look at the GAP page, Geospatial Animation Project, on the Phoenix Lights Network website, you will see not only animations, but also illustrations, beautiful illustrations by Larry Lowe, that after a 12-year study and 2 or more people had to see the same craft to be in the study, from thousands of reports from the National UFO Reporting Center in Seattle, Arizona MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, Councilwoman Frances Barley, who was vice mayor at the time, and she was the only woman asked for an investigation. She didn't see it, but she tried to get an investigation. It was plastered by the media. There was so much ridicule and misrepresentation and discrediting. And also Village Labs, which was a clearinghouse for many of the reports. It was a computer lab, big computer lab near Tempe, near Arizona State University. There were actually 10 different craft that were described, and they were very different. Now, whether it was one craft that could morph, or the perspective from where the person was standing, or a parade. And that was the conclusion, because there were so many things, orb arrays, different crafts seen throughout the state and beyond. One of these crafts, talk about technology, not only were they gliding right over people's heads, rooftop level. Some people said they could have thrown a rock at it. Other people saw it with no sound, by the way, take off at wing speed without even dispersing the air. Other people saw these orbs detach from the main object, go out into the environment and redock with it. And by the way, if you look at the 95 pictures of the close orbs, the same exact phenomenon is in the background, disappearing at the same time, in the same location as 2 months before the mass sighting and during the mass sighting. So this phenomenon was around. Also, some people saw one of the craft just split in two and then shoot straight up in the air. I mean, the technology was amazing. So we're talking about not only massive craft, as well as orb formation, but the technology. We haven't seen anything that comes close to this technology in over 22 years. I would love somebody to tell me what they were.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit on a really great variety of things here. It seems like while most people that have heard of the Phoenix Lights, they might think the main sighting, as you mentioned. But like you said, it seems like it wasn't isolated. You have several different things going on in many states, and it wasn't just one thing that happened at this time and that was it, but a lot of people seem to have seen many different parts of the entire part of that activity over that time frame. And so what are your thoughts on how that affected what we're understanding as UFOs when it comes to the typical, people think UFO is alien spaceship, right? But the problem with that is UFO just means unidentified. So it's something that people can see, but because they don't know, it's hard to make sense of. When you have something like this with all of these lights, it can be hard to tell what's going on, especially if it's in the dark and you can only see the lights. But something that we see, and it's pointed out here on this graphic, it has this boomerang shape to it. Now, you had mentioned how there's something that seems to connect all of these lights together. They're all part of a solid object. And now you're talking about the technology behind allowing for that to happen. It just seems so far beyond what we're dealing with in our public domain and the technology that we have now. What are your thoughts on how this is going to be affecting our understanding of what's possible with technology and aviation? What do you think?
Well, first of all, there's so many directions I could go with this.
Sure,
First of all, I've never said what these were because I don't know what they were. I just know that they were. And I have the evidence to prove it, okay?
Right.
It's been analyzed and authenticated. But it's time we get this out in the open so we can address it and accept it and study it so we can find out who is driving these things, as well as move forward in our own evolution. Because it's very poignant and important to note that there has not been not one report of harm, threat, or abduction associated with the Phoenix Lights phenomenon. I can't speak for other things, but I can about the Phoenix Lights. And it was quite the opposite. People were in awe, people were in wonder, people were curious, people pulled off on the road, kids who initially, because Hollywood and the media portrays these things as scary.
Right.
The movie Independence Day was huge 6 months before the mass sighting. So children who saw this gigantic thing coming towards them were jumping up and down Independence Day. But as it came closer, a calmness came over everyone, adults and children alike, a connectedness to the phenomenon. That when it passed, the kids wanted to run after it or have their parents drive after it. So just that aspect alone, how it affected people at such a deep level, not only in real time, but long term. People went into the peace movement, people went into the environmental movement. People, to this day, tell me they felt blessed. They still feel blessed that they had that experience. Now that doesn't happen with planes and flares and balloons and all that.
Right.
But besides that, it affected people so deep that the Phoenix Lights mass sighting, and I've been asked this so many times since I came forward 7 years after the mass sighting.
Yeah.
With the first edition of the book, and now it's in its third edition. They touch one person at a time at such a deep soul level, not only to wake them up to the fact that we're not alone in the universe, but also to wake people up to the capabilities of every human being, the positive capabilities, how we can change this world to a better world. People were just enlightened. I mean, it's just a fact. It's not rumors, it's not new age, it's what happened to people that were really awakened. And in fact, in the book, the book is about the Phoenix Lights. I had a 750-page journal.
Oh, yeah.
that I condensed the most credible data. I've tried to be as scientific as I can as a scientist, as a physician, to let people know that they're not alone, that they're not crazy, that even though most anomalies can be explained, only small percentage cannot. Just because we don't have the technology yet to definitively define what these things are, it doesn't mean they're not real.
Exactly.
You just be looking on the AM dial for an FM frequency, whatever.
Right.
But the fact is that as the story progressed, more and more credible people came forward. And the story has really, this is the third edition, with the 12-year study is in here, as well as the fact that a number of people, this is a really interesting aspect, that I interviewed shared that they had near-death experiences as children that was reawakened by the mass sighting. And I found that really poignant because I did too.
Wow.
And we don't have time to get into it today, but I lay it all out there in the book. It changed my life at 8 years old. I thought everybody knew the secret and everybody was empathic and everybody was like,
Oh, yeah.
but besides that, I never felt alone. And as an experiencer, especially seeing the Phoenix Lights, and as an educator for over 40 years with the reality of vital health issues, that's what I've dedicated my life's work to. In fact, what's interesting, besides producing the documentary that we've won over a dozen international film festival awards, we're so proud.
Right, it's great.
And that's evolved as well, and we keep adding to the bonus features. Astronaut Edgar Mitchell is in it. We have 911 police operator that was on call that night, had hundreds of calls which they denied, as well as a pilot that was a Vietnam and commercial airline pilot that went right over his head, and he's really so descriptive, as well as the other witnesses, and it's neat to hear from the witnesses firsthand.
Yeah.
And then I've gone back to my passion of really combining everything in this graphic novel activities coloring book for all ages that not only has the 10 different craft in it, but also has a history. We have iconic pictures. We also have 80 crop circles
Oh, wow.
as well as also have activities and not only activities, but we also have the answers for those of us who are too old.
Great.
So try to really compile. This is 7 years in the making, the last 7 years.
Wow.
And I've really tried, as I did with my health issues, to get it into the classroom, which we're still trying to do. Hopefully that will happen soon. But in the meantime, we have all these that are really at the 5th grade level, so everyone can enjoy them and also share them with their family.
That's amazing. So when we deal with the Phoenix Lights and many of the other incredible UFO sightings and encounters and all the different facets of this field, what do you find we can look forward to in the future and that we can learn from with this incident and the sightings that you got to see firsthand? What's something that we can have as a takeaway that lets us understand more about what we're looking into the future when it comes to technology, the medical field maybe, and what can we learn from this incident and others like it that'll help prepare us in the future?
There is so much information and so much more to the story of the Phoenix Lights. That's why it keeps on evolving, and I really welcome people not only to read the book, because there's a lot more to the story, and I lay it all out there. We'd be here for 10 hours.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But also the website. The Phoenix Lights Network website is really comprehensive. I wanted to have a place where people could go and explore and consider and learn. And certainly we have the photo page with the 35mm photographs, the GAP page that has the animations and the 10 different crafts, plus the news page. And we have Kurt Russell's interview with UK, which is really amazing because I mentioned in the first book in 2004, because the air traffic controller shared with me that a pilot called in to report the lights. I shared that in my first book. I had no idea who the pilot was.
Right,
and
wow.
it ends up to be Kurt Russell.
That's great.
And also, how the story unfolded, which is interesting in itself because there was no investigation, no explanation from us until a front page USA Today article, June 18th, opened it up to international scrutiny with deluge by media from all over the world. The very next day, for the first time, we hear from the governor, former Governor Vice Simington. He's putting on a press conference to introduce the culprit of the lights over Phoenix, and he marches out one of his aides in a giant alien head costume.
That's right.
He made a mockery, which was really disconcerting. And it wasn't until when I called around to all military bases, they had no idea what this was either. And then suddenly I get a call actually from the Air National Guard that, they never looked at the log, and there was a visiting Air National Guard from Maryland sending off flares, which was like, excuse me, were they here in January? No. I said, are you sure? Absolutely not. Well, I have pictures from 2 months before the mass shooting of the same exact phenomenon
Right.
in the same exact location, confirmed by air traffic controllers as appearing over Class B restricted airspace, and she said, you never told me that. And then I said, plus, you're trying to tell me that flares that cannot keep the formation, they drift and drop in the wind, have used smoke trails and are illuminated by the flare itself. And not one person described that, by the way, to date. Traverse the entire state in a rock-solid, incandescently spaced mile-wide V formation for hours. And she says, I have a call coming in, I'll get back to you. I'm still waiting.
Oh, of course.
So anyway, from after that, which is interesting, 3 years later, at the urging of Francis Garwood, who was then running for Secretary of State for reenactment, they tried 3 Air National Guards and failed. That's on the news page. If you scroll down the news page, you can see what they did. It was typical flares that knew nothing, looked nothing like the Phoenix Light. And then 10 years later, our former governor came forward to say that he actually saw one of the craft, and that it was otherworldly.
Right. So, despite coming out with the bit of a mockery of the alien, he actually came forward and said, well, I saw it too. There was something to it.
Right. It
So,
was otherworldly.
there is
It wasn't
something.
flares. And that's the only explanation they ever came up with. Actually, they never, ever addressed, to date, the craft.
Right. And this is an incredible opportunity for people to see that this is a real phenomenon. It's not just imaginary, and there's something here for everybody. And you do a great job of covering the information for all ages. I think it'll help prepare future generations to be more accepting and open-minded when it comes to this. So it's something I'm really glad that you have the opportunity to come and share with us about here. So tell us one more time, how can people find out more about your work if they're interested in getting your books, following up with the Phoenix Lights Network?
books and the documentary are all available on the website, the Phoenix Lights Network website, and also these are offered on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Great. Well, Dr. Kitei, it's been an honor to have you here with us. Thank you for coming forward after all of these years to help provide some incredible information and insight, not just to the Phoenix Lights, but how we can move forward in our understanding and our betterment of humanity ultimately. So thank you.
And keep looking up.
See you in the Vortex.
If you liked this video, be sure to check out our other content and get connected on our page and social media sites. Every day, new discoveries are being made all across the world and beyond, so let's work together to find out what's next. And remember, we won't know if we don't go. I'll see you in the Vortex.